Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Jorge Otero Pailos. I'm the director of the Historic Preservation Program, and we're thrilled to do this live webinar about the Historic Preservation Program for prospective students. I'm joined here by some of our current students who will be talking about their experience in the program. Nina Lang, who is class of 19, doing the Master of Science in Historic Preservation. Ryan Zeke, also a class of 19. Valentina Angelucci, who is a dual degree between the Masters of Architecture program and the Master of Science in Historic Preservation, will be also graduating next spring. And Aura Maria Jaramillo, also class of 19 and the Master of Science in Historic Preservation. So let me tell you a little bit about the program just to give you a sense of what we do. And then we're going to turn to your questions, and we're going to have a little bit of a discussion around that. So the preservation program at Columbia is the oldest in the United States. It was started by James Marston Fitch in 1964, and it has since then set the standard for education and historic preservation. We have world-class faculty that flies in from around the world to teach our courses, that keep innovating the curriculum so that we stay ahead and in tune with the times and continue to set the standard for historic preservation education and practice. This year we launched the first PhD program in historic preservation in the country, which is really beginning to elevate the standards of scholarship in the field and is really making a contribution also to the way in which we think about preservation at the master's level. And we have just renovated our preservation laboratory, so very exciting. This was the place in 1977 that really began the study of historic preservation from a material science and technology standpoint, what we normally call conservation, so materials conservation. So now, almost 30 years later, we have completely renovated the lab. We have a world-class facility. And we're very excited about that where our students and faculty can teach. We are actually just putting in the final touches of that laboratory, so it's really quite exciting. The program, the Master of Science in Historic Preservation program, is structured around 2 years. It's a full-time program. Now, students are registered full-time. We've just launched this year a new integrated curriculum around bringing together all the areas of research that really make up what it is to practice historic preservation. Now, I think that for most people, when you start considering a career in preservation, it's often because you had some sort of like really moving experience in at some old building, or maybe a monument, or maybe some historic site. You were there and you were just you were moved by it, and it's really that connection between people and places that we're very interested in, and we're very interested in how do we sustain that over time. In the end, that's what preservation, you could say, is about, is sustaining that connection between people and places. But it's actually really hard, and so we think about the social, the connection between people and places. That's what the new curriculum brings in, but also the laboratory, the science, the technology that goes into that, because you have to be able to intervene into that monument to keep it up to date so that it satisfies the requirements of society. The archival, historical research, that's also part of the curriculum. So you have to establish whether this is an important monument. So a lot of it is also not just existing monuments, but also finding out if something that's already there might be considered a monument, and doing what we call designation, so designating something a monument. And the other is, the building itself, as an architect, what it is that you need to do in order to maintain that building from either building technology, like the systems of the structure, the envelope, the roof, or also the aesthetics, because every time you do an intervention, even if it's just to clean the building, you're going to change the way it looks. So the social, laboratory, archival, and building, we call that the SLAB. It's the SLAB research methods, and it's a kind of foundation for the entire curriculum. You learn a lot about the history and the relevant knowledge in the field, and all of that is integrated in the core of the curriculum, which is a series of studios. So we're a studio-centric program, and the studio organizes your path through the program. There are 3 studios. Studio 1 is really focusing on a single building. Often in New York, we use New York as a laboratory, so that single building becomes the focus of your study, and you learn to identify it as a historical building, who lived there, why is it historically important, what are the materials. You really learn to analyze the building, and then you make a proposal at the end of that studio of how do I keep that building alive for the next, and you name it, 10, 20, 50 years. Then Studio 2 moves to look at the building in context. And so we look at a building inside of some sort of urban realm. It can be, suburban, or it can be, not necessarily in the city, although we typically work within New York City or in the tri-state area, often up along the Hudson River. And we look at not just the physical context, but also the social context, the people that live there. What do they need? So that's Studio 2. And Studio 3 is the building in a cross-cultural context. So we look at the way in which different cultures really deal with preservation in different ways. And so everybody travels, and this is a big part of the studio. Everybody goes abroad to a different country and experiences a different culture and looks at the ways in which you can preserve that building there. So we've gone to many different places with Studio 3, and Studio 3 focuses on 3 different areas. So you have a choice in Studio 3 to either focus more on architectural design, and that's a joint studio with the architecture program. So for example, Valentina, who's been doing the dual degree, is in that studio, but also Aura Maria, who's doing the preservation masters, is in that studio, so it's a joint degree. You can also take Studio 3 as an advanced technology studio, which is more concerned with digital scanning, data management, reproduction, making 3D printing of replacement parts of buildings or entire sections of buildings. Or you can be in the policy and planning studio, which is a joint studio with the planning program that looks at really how do you manage an entire area. And I think who's in that? You're both in the tech. You're both in the tech studio, so we don't have anybody from the planning studio. But I can talk a little bit more about that if it seems appropriate. So really, what you notice from that description is that we are really building-centric. In other words, we are architecture-centric. We're one of the very few programs in the U.S. that really focuses on the preservation of architecture, of existing architecture, inhabited architecture oftentimes. People are living in it. We have to deal with those questions of use and reuse. So we have a big focus with adaptive reuse. We have a joint program with the real estate program that deals with adaptive reuse questions. A lot of our students, in fact, do dual degrees, so depending on their interests. And so if some of you out there are interested in dual degrees, then please reach out to us and we can guide you in the right direction. Now, big emphasis of our program is independent research. So in 2 years, students that come in, they learn the basics of preservation the first year, and then their second year they begin to go into the advanced areas of preservation and begin to really work towards contributing new knowledge to the field. So a major part of the second year is the thesis. So the whole curriculum is structured around 3 studios plus a thesis. And the thesis is what you're all stressed out about right now because you just had your presentation. But it's a year-long process, and you work very closely with 1 faculty member and 2 readers that are both that are on the faculty. But you decide what you want to research. So in your applications, as you're thinking about writing your application, I would strongly encourage everyone to tell us what it is that you want to research, what it is that motivates you, in your motivation letter. tell us what it is that you can imagine your thesis might be. And of course it will change. When you get here, your interests will go in different directions. But as you write that will give you a sense of what the field is, because you'll have to go out and sort of figure out more or less what the state of the field is. And what would your contribution be? What can you bring to the field? That's what the students are really asked to do. And we believe that in challenging orthodoxies, so we teach all the students to know what the state of the field is, but then we encourage everyone to say, okay, how can that field be changed? How can we improve it? What is it that we need to do? And that's where the thesis comes in. For the thesis, we try to really give you as much support as we can. There is money that we give you to go do research. I think you all just applied for that money, so we approved all those stipends, so you get money to go travel to different places, and we'll go around the table to ask you a little bit where you're doing your research. And so we try to support as much as we can your work. Between the first and second year, we strongly encourage people to go out and get an internship. So to start doing work already, so that you begin to test out what your thesis might be about. So you might go to a different country and have an internship somewhere else. And we work very hard. Devin, who you've probably been in touch with, and is really in charge of career services and tries to connect everyone up with potential employers around the world. We have we sort of pride ourselves in having small class. We're very selective in the admissions process, and we try to admit around 20 students per year. That's what we aim at, and it varies from year to year. And we aim for that because we want it to be a very intimate and small program. Columbia is a very big place, but we really pride ourselves in being a small family. Everybody knows each other's names. All the faculty is on a first name basis. So it's a very important part of what we do, because that sort of familiarity is also one of the times in which you learn the most, because you're having exchanges that are not necessarily structured in the class, but we might have a cup of coffee and just sort of discuss something that came up on your mind. And so that's very important, the small class size. The other really important thing is the diversity of the students. We really aim for that. We have students from all over the world, many students from China, from France, from the United Kingdom, from Colombia, from India, South Africa, Colombia, but we have another one from Colombia this year. Anyway, many different, and it varies year to year, but we're really the most international program in the United States, because we really aim for that, to set not only the standard for the U.S., but also that you can go abroad and work in preservation abroad is very important to us. And that exchange is really key, because people come with completely different backgrounds, completely ways of doing things, and just coming together in the studio and trying to work out those differences is really very important. Why don't I stop there and just sort of ask you a little bit, we can go around and have you talk a little bit about the kind of, first of all, obviously where you're from, but maybe also you're all in Studio 2 at the moment. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the studio that you're in and the kind of thing that you're doing, and then we'll circle back to talk about thesis and that sort of thing. Does that sound all right? Nina, why don't you start talking about your studio?
So my name's Nina Lang. I'm in the technology studio right now that Jorge was talking about. We are currently working on digital documentation and high-resolution scanning of the Casa de Pilatos in Seville, Spain. So we got back a couple weeks ago, and we're now kind of processing all the data that we collected while we were there. It was kind of a whirlwind few days, but that's what I've been doing this semester.
Super. By the way, I think I get this question a lot. Oh, you guys travel with Studio 3. Do we have to pay for that? Is that something that we need to pay? So the answer is no, that we have stipends that we give you in order to pay for your plane ticket, for your hotel, and all of that. So, but that's a question we get a lot, so I just wanted to answer that real quick. So, Ryan.
Yes, hello. I'm Ryan Zeke, and I was also in the tech studio with Nina. And I thought it was a great opportunity to go to an actual historical site and be there in person and actually use these technologies. I thought it was amazing. We spent a whole week there. Had a chance to also see some of the other sites in Sevilla, and we had a great time. Like I said, we're really working on all the data now and sort of coming up with our deliverables from that.
I was in the review, and it's really phenomenal to see how in just a few weeks you began to master this technology of 3D scanning, but at a sub-millimetric scale, and to work around some real difficulties, because you guys were scanning these incredible glazed tiles, right, that have this luminosity and this glaze. Maybe could you talk a little bit about that? The sort of just the deep problems with that glazing and in terms of the technology?
The Casa de Palatos, it's a 15th century ducal palace that has sort of grown over the years. It started off as a small chapel, and then there was accretions over the years as the family grew in prominence. And part of the main focus of their house, the decoration, was, like Jorge said, these very elaborate tiles that fill the courtyard and many of the rooms on the bottom and first floors, and there's like a grand staircase going up. So one of the issues then that we had was when we're scanning the technology that we're using, it's been developed for scanning artwork. So it was basically used for like matte products at first, but when they were expanding, they've done a lot, the company Factum Muerte and Factum Foundation that we're partnering
So
with.
this is the foundation that is run by one of our faculty members, Adam Lowe and Carlos Bayod, two of our faculty members. And it's a foundation that is dedicated to the scanning and replication of heritage around the world.
So they actually developed, it's a proprietary scanner that they developed for use on heritage and art installations. So that's what we were using. And the challenge then was, depending on the reflectivity of the surfaces or the colors, the darkness, that you had to really adjust the scanning levels and everything to try and get like the best product possible.
Yeah, and something else we were doing was photogrammetry, which is, so we did photogrammetry, the Lucida scanner that Ryan was talking about, and Faro scanning, which is larger LIDAR laser scanning of larger spaces. And so with each of them, we kind of had to deal with different things. So with the Lucida, it was a lot about, on the darker surfaces, the reflectivity, you get issues, you get kind of holes when you're compiling all the data because the laser doesn't know what to do with all that bounce back. And with the photogrammetry, we were fighting the sun. We were kind of running away from it in the courtyard the whole time because we would get some reflectivity there and it would affect our data. And with the LIDAR scanning, it was tourists kind of standing in front and getting in the way of our scan, and their face was right in the middle of the scan. So that was another thing that we had to kind of learn about, was how to deal with all these documentation methods in an active heritage site. And kind of still doing our work, but also not impeding the visitor experience at the same time.
And one of the things that's really great about that is, obviously, this is a site that those tiles are one of the greatest collections of 15th century tiles. And many of them are broken or fallen off, or there's a lot of, so you guys are really working on, okay, now that we have it scanned, can we 3D print one of these tiles and do a replica that might, or be a replacement? So there's an experimental side to this. How does one do a replacement for this very important a collection of tiles? That is really what gives this place significance. So that's really still ongoing, because you guys are going to be 3D printing these tiles, that the glazes really, the tiles are three-dimensional, so that the glazes sit inside of those tiles. So it's quite the three-dimensionality of the tile you guys are getting is really phenomenal. But we're going down the rabbit hole, so we got to come out of the rabbit hole. Valentina.
Yes.
Yeah, your studio.
So I'm me and Aura are in the dual degree studio Architecture and Historic Preservation. And our site is the American Embassy in Mexico City. It's a mid-century embassy that's about to be decommissioned. So part of our prompt for the studio is to think about how adapted for future use. And it's been a very interesting process, and it's been great to learn both about the context that the building sits in and how we can respond to its current the current needs of the city and where it can go from here. Yeah.
And my name is Laura Maria, and on a more kind of practical day-to-day level of the studio, I think it's also been very interesting because it is an active embassy. As preservation architects, having to address a site where documentation is not readily available.
Sure.
So how do you approach the design problem when you have a limited amount of information, and how do you establish certain criteria or ideas for moving forward? Yeah.
And your studio is an adaptive reuse studio,
Yes.
right? Which is also a big part of the program, which is to figure out, okay, how do you actually take a monument and use it for a new purpose in a way that maintains its significance and its integrity, but it also brings that whole new program in, which is, as we're finding out, quite hard. And especially the embassies are extraterritorial, so they're really not protected. So the architecture has to do the job in a way of saying, this is important.
This is worth it, yeah. Yes.
Fascinating studio. I had the pleasure of going with you because I'm teaching the studio, and therefore it's really fascinating. But Mark Rakatansky also co-teaches the studio, right? And so maybe you can talk a little bit about your because he's in the architecture. He really is between architecture and preservation. But this is a joint studio with architecture. So if you're doing the architecture degree on your third year, you take the studio.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how that works? The joint.
Sure. So it's a 4-year program in total, and the first year is just preservation. Then the second year you join the first year MArchs. You're with them for 2 years, and then in your final year you come back for this joint studio and write a thesis at the same time. So it's great that you get your foundation in preservation, and then through the architecture program you still have the choice to do some electives within the preservation program depending on your interests. So there is still overlap between the two. And then with Mark's class, I think it was great because he, as you've mentioned, he's architectural historian and professor, and so he brings a different way of reading. His class is called Reading Buildings, Writing Buildings, and he brings a different way of analyzing existing buildings in ways that you don't necessarily think about off the bat, which is great. And I think it's critical to this cross-fertilization of the two programs, actually.
So we are an architecture-centric program. There are other programs that deal more with like archaeological treatments. There's an archaeological site. It's not used. There's other programs that are that don't really emphasize the building technology or the building, but really deal with the social or the regulatory. We try to bring it all together. And when I say that we're a building-centric, architectural-centric program, oftentimes prospective students say, do I have to be an architect to be in this program? So I just wanted to address that question, maybe to ask you all your background.
Yeah.
I'm the
Ryan's
one
the
actually,
non-architect.
So they all have architecture backgrounds, and I was the one that was wondering, like, oh, will I be able to, make it into the program? And the answer is yes, I'm still here. So it works. There are so many great resources that were made available to me to sort of try and catch up to speed and sort of learn some of the skills that the architecture background people already have. My big thing was the drawing AutoCAD and other sort of like 3D rendering software that the faculty was great. We had a program last year that was able to sort of take like a quick focus on some of the major technologies that would be used, and then also, Studio One always has great TAs. These two are the TAs for Studio One this year,
Yes.
and they are, so available to the students, and so I did not feel that I had to worry. It was a little bit of work, but it's worth it in the end because
What's your background in?
history, yeah. So just solely history, yeah.
And
We have a
nobody,
lot of people.
nobody could tell that Ryan wasn't an architect at our review. Everybody was very impressed. So he did a great job.
We are, the other thing that's very important about the program, I think, to say is, we're sitting here in Avery Hall, which is, the legendary Avery Hall with Avery Library, one of the best libraries in the world in architecture, with the archives of Frank Lloyd Wright, the archives of Felix Candela, archives of McKim and White. We have incredible original drawings, original manuscripts that oftentimes when we're working on these buildings we go and consult, or where we're writing history papers. It's such a thrill to be able to pull the actual drawing of whomever when we're working on the embassies, Jane Loeffler's archive. But we also have New York City. And a big part of the program, I always say that you learn best about architectural preservation in the field, that we are very field oriented. So for example, our building technology class really is almost like every other week it goes to the field. And so there's a lot of field trips to go see an original foundation. Maybe if you guys could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Field trips.
Well, my favorite building systems field trip was to Ellis Island. We got to do kind of the not so public tour of the hospital wing and the kind of second half of the island over there. That's it hasn't had a major preservation campaign, so it's kind of in this really interesting half ruined state, but they're stable. It's all stabilized, and so a lot that meant that we were able to see a lot of the structural pieces. Where the ceiling was falling out, you could see the terracotta fireproofing, and you could walk around and see all of the the vaults and the arches, and that was my favorite field trip, definitely.
Yeah, I agree. I also enjoyed Ellis Island. Sort of like in a similar, secret access type of thing. We just had with architectural metals class, we went to the Hoboken Terminal, which is, I think it's the 1907 structure, the largest copper-clad building. I don't know, it might be in the country, but I know it's definitely in the New York City area. So we were looking at the conservation issues with that, and also there is a very large passenger concourse that they used for the ferries. And historically, I think the way that it was, the cargo would go on the bottom floor and then the passengers would go on the top, because the way that the ferry was, it was, you had to board from the top angle. And now the ferries are much more, they're the tiny ones, they can maneuver a little bit more, so you get on at the bottom. So this whole passenger concourse is just sort of abandoned, and you go in there and it's like this, it's, when it was closed, I think in the 1960s or something, and just sort of been like this time capsule of, it's been stabilized, but sort of there's all these just other architectural, pieces that are still there, and you can see sort of how the conservation issue would come up, and what we can do possibly, and sort of they were trying to come up with ideas. It's still unused, but it was a great opportunity to sort of go behind the scenes.
That class is taught by Piper, who is perhaps the world's expert on metals. He can identify a metal.
I was like, Piper, what's that?
Yeah. So, and he really brings it to life, and it makes me think that the importance of having the world's experts in the program, and that we really emphasize that. And when they're not here, we fly them in. So one of the things that we have is, in addition to all the classes, we have what we call master classes, and those master classes are intense, deep dives into a certain subject. And we fly somebody from another country, another state, to teach that knowledge. So we had Eric Langdalen talking about power and preservation just a couple weeks ago. Next semester we will have Robert Hewison, who is the world's expert on John Ruskin, teaching a class on John Ruskin. Barbara Campagna, who is former president of the Association for Preservation Technology and leading a massive redevelopment of Buffalo, New York, from all of the industrial heritage, turning it into new worker training. So a lot of the master classes really provide that engagement with the world's experts, and also begin to help you not only understand the issues, but begin to help you begin to connect with people around the world. The other part is the lecture series. So every Thursday night we have a big speaker come in. Martin Ashley from the UK came a couple weeks ago talking about the royal palaces, the work that he's done to preserve the royal palaces in the UK. So maybe favorite lectures thus far, or any? I'm putting you on the spot. I know, but that's what you.
I really remember Aaron Vinegar's lecture last semester because his research focuses on Viollet-le-Duc, which is kind of the Ruskin counterpoint, which is someone that is very familiar to us, or becomes very familiar to us at a certain point, and he completely took it and turned it upside down.
Yeah.
And I think that was a very, it was a very provocative talk, and I see that others felt similarly too.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what's great about the lecture series too is the range of speakers that we get. Not only are they from all over the world, but they're also from different fields. We've had artists, we've had writers, we've had conservators. So it's great to be able to just like dip your toes into other aspects of the field every Thursday. Yeah.
Any favorite lectures, Ryan?
I'm stumbling on the name. That duo that went to the glass house and
Gerard and Kelly, the artists.
Yeah, so that was like what you're saying. The
Yeah.
artists. It was like definitely interesting to sort of see how artists are using their work as promote preservation. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm also forgetting the name, but the lecturer who came and he sleeps in house museums.
Franklin Vagnone.
Yeah, Frank
Yeah.
Vagnone, the anarchist.
Yes.
Anarchist
Anarchist
preservation.
Yeah.
That was really interesting because I'm a very tactile person. So like I walk into a site and I immediately want to touch everything, and so just thinking about preservation in a way that he's actually touching all this stuff that's usually very off limits was like a really interesting thing to me.
And he has a fabulous blog of him sleeping in house museums.
Yeah, like rates all the beds.
Right, yeah. Bed bugs on this one. The other aspect that we emphasize here, of course, like through your theses, you're already beginning to elevate the discourse and beginning to challenge orthodoxies, pushing the field forward, knowledge in the field. We put a lot of emphasis on that. It's a year-long process. Tell us a little bit about your thesis. Very short, elevator pitch, what you're working on, just so that people get a sense of the kinds of work that you're doing.
So my thesis is about preservation in protest sites and kind of ways to continue conversation beyond just having a static monument in a preservation site, and how they can kind of be active places.
And I'm looking at the approaches taken by the National Park Service at some projects in Philadelphia for the bicentennial. So sort of the bicentennial is a moment of time in the field of historic preservation and sort of where it came from and what it contributed.
Yeah.
My thesis is on Johannesburg's gold mining landscapes and how the mine tailings that formed the city are being removed, and how are we going to remember them afterwards.
And I'm looking at the work of a little-known preservationist in Rome called Antonio Munoz, and trying to place him in context within what was happening in Italy in the 1930s and 40s.
He's little known, but really big.
But really
in a way.
involved.
That's sort of the question, right? He redesigned Rome. It's like when you look
And
at
we
Rome
don't know who he was.
and who he was. Yes, so very,
Odd.
yeah, hot potato, because
Yes.
the politics are a little bit.
Yeah.
So dealing with the political questions, I think in all the theses are very interesting. That politics of the bicentennial or monuments. The the politics of the mining landscape. It's a very interesting, I think, constant in the program to really deal with the social issues and the charge that these monuments have, because monuments are political. So we're very much trying to promote that your theses engage on all that. And the other aspect of it is there are a lot of sort of para-curricular activities, not only the lecture series, but in the effort to help advance scholarship in the field, we also have Future Anterior, which we started in 2004, was the first scholarly journal in the country, and it's really a point of reference in the field. So students participate in that. They help to manage the journal, and we have it on various issues. Moving monuments have been recent issues. We just had a call for papers on disability and preservation, war and preservation. So if those of you that are interested in the program, we also encourage you to, pick up an issue or, write us. We'll send you an issue of Future Anterior, or just go online and you can download it from, if you're currently at a university, you can download it from your university library as a PDF. So take a look at that kind of work. As you finish your thesis, we have a number of thesis prizes to recognize, outgoing work. And we recently established a very important thesis prize, the Onera Prize, which is a $20,000 prize. This is the biggest cash prize in the school, and it goes exclusively to a preservation student to take an idea and put it into practice. So oftentimes this is going to be take your thesis idea and see if you can make it into practice. This is a professional program, so our emphasis is getting you employed when you get out of here. So we do a lot of work to do that. We try to give you as many resources as we can to try to get you employed when you get out. The Onera Prize is that little extra oomph to really reward the ambition of somebody that wants to move into the field with a radical idea that might not be implementable at the moment. But on top of that, we really try to get you to collaborate and to network with our alumni network. One of the aspects of our program is we have the largest alumni network in the country. We do a lot from day one for you to have connections with the alumni, begin to nurture the possible internships. So do you want to talk a little bit about your experience with the alumni thus far? We have a mentorship program where alumni sort of pair up with you. Maybe we'll start there, since I keep asking to speak first. Maybe I'll ask Aura
So
Maria.
the mentorship program, and Ryan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it started with our class last year, and it's been a great resource to have in tandem with faculty, with the faculty that is so involved with your own process and your own interests, to have somebody else kind of on the outside also contribute and guide you and further connect you. Actually, it was through the connections I made through the lecture series visitors that I actually, this summer, I tried my hand at teaching a little bit. And I guess that's a little bit of kind of how the networking happened. So, yeah.
I think to build on that and what you said, Jorge, about the smallness of our program, that we become a bit like a family, I feel like that extends also to the alumni, because at any networking events or at the PA events that they have, all the alumni are really supportive and encouraging of the work that the students are doing, and very helpful and willing to lend a hand when looking for jobs or like researching. So you do have a very wide reach here across the country and in the city.
So I'm actually, Aura was like saying, oh, you can correct me, but so I'm the preservation alumni rep for our class. So that's sort of my connection to this. And it is such a good resource. We have like the best and brightest people that we can reach out to. We have, besides the mentorship program, we also there's like speed networking events to sort of help get you to just get out there, meet people, see what people are doing, what interests you, there is someone from Columbia that is doing a little bit of everything. So whatever your interest is, there is probably an alumni that we can connect you to and help you sort of realize that idea. And they, like I said, they're so gracious, outgoing, welcoming. So as part of the alumni, you can join as like a student, you can have like a student membership to Preservation Alumni, and you get access to this database. And I actually have reached out to people, based on their areas of expertise, or, you live in this certain place, when I have research questions, and no one has ever, not gotten back to me. It's an amazing resource to have.
That's great.
Yeah, I second all of that about it being an amazing resource. The PA also does, in addition to like speed networking events, they have kind of more fun, like extracurricular activities. Yeah,
Pub
they
crawl.
do. Yeah, the pub crawl, which is really fun. I've formed some great connections through PA, and actually over the summer was able to get a lot of different interviews because of connections that I had through PA. So it's really valuable, and I mean beyond like gaining a leg up in your career because of it. Like everybody's just really great and very helpful and willing to help you get further in your career.
I think that one of the things that I always remark with these exchanges with preservation alumni is just the degree to which, they understand that you're not here to just study preservation, you're here to change the world. And they try to, we certainly from the program standpoint, through your thesis, through the kind of work that you do, really think about, okay, how can we support you to do that? What are your ambitions? How can we, give you the resources that you need to carry those ambitions out, whether it be knowledge, whether it be, equipment, whether it be, mental equipment or physical drills or, the connections out in the world to be able to start testing those out. Because we really believe that you can change the world through preservation. It is one of those aspects that now, as people reconsider the growth of cities, we have to adapt cities. We have to really think about the existing cities. We're not going to rebuild New York. We're not going to build a new New York. We're going to have to rebuild New York and adaptively reuse it. So that this is really a major sort of threshold that we're hitting in terms of climate change and so on, that we need to really, there are some theses that are working on climate change. How do we really think about the coastal changes? So this is really important that this is really a program for those of you that want to change the world, and do that and invest yourself in that. And so people always ask, well, I'm doing all this work and I'm trying to change the world, and can I get a job on the side? And I always say, maybe that's too ambitious, having a job on the side, but we do have work opportunities in the program. And so many of you TA do teaching assistantships or do, casual employment or hourly basis. We have a ton of different positions. If you want to work, you can certainly work. There's no question about that. So maybe you guys can talk a little bit about the kind of work that you've decided to do in the program, because it's obviously everyone has a choice. So maybe, do you want to start, or whoever wants to jump in? You don't all have to answer every question. We can also, you can take a pass on.
So I do both actually. I'm a casual pay worker and a teaching assistant this semester. And it's been really great. I work, my casual pay position is as an office assistant in the program office, and I do kind of a lot of behind the scenes organizational things, and just kind of picking up wherever Devin needs help. I'm like Devin's little minion, and it's great.
Not quite. Not quite.
And then I'm also a teaching assistant this semester for teaching assistant for 3 different classes. So I'm teaching assistant for architectural metals, for the traditional building technology, and for our thesis colloquium class. So it's, I get to kind of be behind the scenes everywhere, and I like helping out with my classmates. So it's nice to be able to be for the first years and for the class like a person that people can come talk to and kind of be that liaison. I enjoy that.
Sure, pass it to you.
During my first year, I helped organize the lecture series, and I was doing some research with Professor Andrew Dolkart, and that was more than I could chew. But it was the lecture series was an amazing opportunity to connect and to really kind of dive into the program from day one. And the research assistant position was also kind of a warm up to what I wanted to do for the second year, which was to be a teaching assistant. And this year with Valentina, we're both TAing Studio One, and that involves a lot of one-on-one time with the first year class, helping them kind of further whenever they don't have a faculty day, then we kind of fill in with additional advice or thoughts or tutorials on different softwares that they need to use.
Yeah, you do a little bit of teaching, don't you?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
We have a little bit of time left, and I want to make sure that to address some of the questions that students, prospective students, have asked about what it is to be a student. So why don't we turn to those, and then I also, before we wrap up, I also want sort of your words of wisdom for prospective applicants. What should they be thinking about? How should they best prepare their applications? How should they best prepare themselves, to get ready for the program? So why don't we have some of the questions that were sent in front of us. One was, how can someone who has majored in architecture and urbanism use their architectural knowledge inside the Master of Science in Historic Preservation? So maybe this is a question for Aura, since that's how you came into the program.
Yes. There is, and it kind of circles back, my answer will circle back a little bit to what we were discussing before, whether you needed to be an architect to be in the program. And there's definitely a lot of skills that you, as an architect, that you come to the program that do give you an advantage, or at least a familiarity with concepts such as what's a plan, what's a section, these kind of general tools of architecture. But at the same time, what I found very eye-opening is interacting with the students that don't have the architecture background and the skills that architects still have a lot of opportunity to improve on, such as how to communicate an argument effectively, how to write effectively. And so I think the architecture background that we have brings us to a certain point, or positions us to help our peers in certain aspects. But at the same time, I think we also have some new skills to acquire once we arrive.
Yeah.
If that answers the question.
Absolutely.
More or less.
Well, I think so. The questions about how can you use that knowledge inside the Master of Science in Historic Preservation, and so you clearly have some skills that you can use. You also have the ability to, let's say, develop that knowledge into questions of adaptive reuse, learning more about materials, because, for example, one of the things that very few architects learn is you build a building, but 10 years later it's falling apart. Why did that happen? Well, what kind of materials did I use? How did I detail them? So a lot of, we're looking at the buildings 20, 30 years down the line. It actually teaches you a lot about new construction, because you can see the failures. It cracked, it broke, this thing weathered. So, and certainly in all the studios, there's a place for someone with a background in architecture, no question. I mean, one of the things that we are very good at here is training preservation architects. It's a growing field, and it's something important sort of to note that about 33% of all projects in the United States, I don't have the numbers worldwide, but let's say more than around a third, if you look at the AIA billings, come from work on existing buildings. So a third of what architects do is to work on existing buildings. But not a third of architects are trained in preservation architecture. So this is really a critical skill in a growing market. The other question is there space for studio-oriented activities on building design, like adaptive reuse, restoration, and so on, in the curriculum? Do you want to take that one up?
Yes. Especially, I mean, you can, if you have the architectural background, you can find those kind of projects in the studios. In Studio One, there's the opportunity to kind of make your project into an adaptive reuse, if that's what you're into. And then I know for our Studio 2 project, we were looking at the adaptive reuse of an abandoned jail in Newark. And so it's like and the nice thing about having that preservation background, looking at adaptive reuse through a preservation lens, is you're not only thinking about how do I reuse like the actual structure, you're thinking about like how do I preserve the memory of this place, and how do I kind of acknowledge the history of it with my reuse. So it kind of goes a step further to enrich the adaptive reuse that you're doing. So I think that's very valuable.
Super. We have some program resource questions. Some of them have to do with computers, like what computer labs and libraries are available to preservation students? Do we talk about Avery Library, for example? I mean, all the libraries at Columbia University are available to you. All the computer labs, but in particular the studio. We have a dedicated space. Can't believe we didn't mention the studio, the preservation studio, which is the place where everybody works together in the studios. The class and the classroom, let's say, we always talk about that as studio. And it's sort of a place where you're just always there. I mean, I don't know, maybe you can talk about studio culture, because I think for some students, the prospective students have never really been in a studio. They don't know what that is. So maybe can you describe a little bit what the studio classroom, that links to, everyone has a computer there that we provide. What is it like to be in a studio?
So just from our own experiences and from what's happening now in the first year studio, it's great because everybody pins up their work on the wall, so you can always see what the people around you are working on. You're doing all the same classes, so your classmates are a great resource to you when you're working. And it's also good because of the support it provides when you're there at night working. It's nice to know that there's other people, like they're working with you. Yeah.
The other spaces that are available are obviously the laboratory, the new laboratory where you'll find microscopes, materials to do different kinds of tests on paint samples, to do different kinds of tests on metals, we have an X-ray gun that tells you what the composition of any material is, the scanning equipment that is there. So it's a place where you do independent research, and it's available to you. There's a laboratory manager that's there to make sure that you don't injure yourself with all the chemicals and things that are spinning. But there's also a fabrication laboratory, so we really connect between the identification and treatment of materials and then the fabrication of replacement parts. So there's a fabrication lab, there's a maker space. So all of these are available to students. There was another question also about the student to faculty ratio. So again, we're a small program, 20 students per class, so there's about 40 people in residence at any one time. At the moment, there's one PhD student. Eventually, there'll be 5, so there'll be 45 students in the program total. And we have 3 full-time faculty members and 22 adjunct faculty. So the adjunct faculty are people who are really in the field. They have their own practices, they have their own projects, and they teach a class. They come in and teach, but they also advise theses, so that's really important. The average class size for a seminar is around 8 students, more or less. We try to keep it around that. The other question was how common it was to do a dual degree.
There are a few of us in our year. This year there's 4 of us. There's one in the year below us. So I'm dual degree with architecture, but there's also dual degree with UP and urban design. and urban planning. And it's great because your thesis usually ends up tying the two together. And so you finish off with a body of work that's reflective of both, I believe.
That's, I think, really critical. But we have a lot of students that really want to do a dual degree with planning and preservation, architecture and preservation, real estate and preservation. We really encourage that. So that's really, really key. I just want to make a little bit of time before we wrap up, just to have your words of advice for potential applicants to the program. It's tough.
Okay.
It is a tough question.
I also just want to, I'll sort of try and tie mine into sort of also the summer stuff, internships and things. Do we have time to talk about that? Okay.
Yeah, we have a few minutes.
So, words of wisdom is, you can probably come up with so many ideas about your theses. Everything is an idea. That's somewhere you're going to find a way to narrow it down somehow. It's tough, but you will do it. And it'll be, so my Studio One building was a Roman Catholic church in Brooklyn, and that sort of led me to my summer internship. I was working with the New York Landmarks Conservancy on their Sacred Sites program, which involves inventorying all of the churches in New York City. And while I was there, something sort of fostered my idea about my thesis, so that there's a path throughout everything, and the internships are a great opportunity in the summer just to, like I said, make the connections, follow something that interests you, and you don't know where it's going to lead you, but, it works out in the end.
So think about your internships. Well, one of the things is, many people don't come from New York. New York is a very big city, but it's also the largest preservation job market in the country. So that's you have access to that market, which is, I think, what you're pointing to, that already in the program you begin to enter into that. Is it a scary place to live, New York? Or some people, I think, is a sort of,
Not scary. It can be a bit overwhelming, but up here, the Upper West Side is quite nice and more quiet than the rest of the city. So.
Yeah, and I coming to New York actually was my big move. I went to undergrad where I grew up, so this was like a big push for me to be here. But I think honestly, coming in and having this community that we've been talking about this whole time here made the transition a lot easier.
Well, I think we're running out of time, and we didn't have time to answer every single question. There were some more here, but if you have any unanswered questions, please contact us at the program office, write to Devin to make sure that all your questions are answered. We'll be in touch with you. If you have other questions, you want to visit our campus, please make sure to let us know. We'll organize a little visit for you. We'll be happy to host you. And this info session will be available for streaming later as well, so you can look for that. We'll be on our website or something, so you can look at it later. So thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to hearing from you, hopefully in your applications. Till then, thanks, and thank you all for joining me.